Joining us now, House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte, Republican 6th District of Virginia. Mr. Chairman, good to have you with us, sir.
John, it's good to be with you and your listeners.
Happy holidays to you and your family. I hope you're going to have a great Thanksgiving.
We are looking forward to it. Our family will all gather here in Roanoke, and we are glad to have time together and glad to give thanks for all the good that God bestows.
Without a doubt. Mr. Chairman, the Paris attacks now about 2 weeks ago, our response to that, I want to get first to the whole situation with ISIS. Nobody can really understand what our strategy is, where we're going with it, why sending 50 special ops are going to do anything, coupled with the fact that we don't have an authorization of war. Obama said 2 weeks ago or 3 that ISIS was contained. People are starting to look at this whole thing and say, what's our plan? Do you have any idea what it is?
No, I don't. I don't think the president has, nor do I think he's ever had a coherent strategy for dealing with not just ISIS, but the entire situation in the Middle East. And it's very concerning, and it has, in my opinion, created a much more dangerous world than when he took office. Even though he inherited a dangerous situation in Iraq and Afghanistan, he came in with a commitment to remove our troops from Iraq and Afghanistan. He's gone about doing that regardless of what the circumstances are on a day-to-day basis in this dangerous part of the world. So he created, by his own actions, the vacuum that ISIS filled in Iraq and not in Syria, but in Iraq, where they could have been stopped by simply having not withdrawn all of our military forces, but maintaining a significant and potent base that could have snuffed out the kind of territorial expansion that this terrorist organization has been able to get hold of. That vacuum has further been filled by Russia, which has consistently supported the regime of the Assad family in Syria and are at odds with the United States on that. But having said that, and having this vacuum created that Russia has stepped up and filled, they are, especially after the downing of their plane over Egypt, and I don't know what the reaction is going to be to the downing of a jet fighter over Turkey yesterday. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, what we're facing is a situation where France has now resolved to take action against ISIS. Russia is taking action against ISIS. The United States, at the very least, needs to have a coordinated plan to take ISIS out. They can't do anything on the ground with regard to ISIS without a new authorization for use of military force, especially with regard to Syria. And I'm not in favor of sending ground troops into Syria with this president in charge and with his lack of planning and his lack of leadership. But he shouldn't engage. He shouldn't even think of acting unilaterally without getting that authorization. Every president who's dealt with situations in that part of the world over the last 30 years has come to the Congress and gotten an authorization for use of military force. George Bush 41 before we went into Kuwait. Bill Clinton before we went into the Balkans, to Bosnia and Kosovo. And George Bush 43 before we went into Afghanistan and then Iraq. All sought approval of the elected representatives of the people. This president acted unilaterally in Libya, and now he's talking about doing the same thing in Syria.
So, Mr. Chairman, your colleague, Democratic U.S. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, has, I would say, demanded the president come to Congress now with an AUMF for some time. When I ask him, hasn't happened, he says that Republican leadership in the House has stopped it. Is that true?
No. What stopped it is the fact that the President of the United States doesn't have a plan, and he doesn't have the leadership ability to sell a plan to the Congress. And he shouldn't act until he has both of those things. And then the Congress, not the President, the Congress gets to decide whether the president has a coherent plan that would be worthy of the Congress granting an authorization for use of military force. That's how it works. And I don't disagree with Tim Kaine that the president needs an AUMF, but I definitely disagree with how this thing has evolved, and to try to blame the House Republicans for the fiasco in the Middle East is passing strange.
All right, I want to get to yesterday, allegedly, Turkey shooting down a Russian warplane, saying it was flying over their airspace. When you look at that, and then you look at some people who are saying, well, we need this free fly zone in Syria. How does this all, I mean, is this even reality? How would that work?
Well, a lot of questions are unanswered about what happened with regard to the shooting down of the Russian plane, why it was done, what threat the Turks thought there were to, even if it were over their airspace. I don't know what that does with regard to Russia's posture in dealing with other countries that are all concerned about ISIS. Now, everybody in this has different objectives, and the Turks, like the United States, would like the Assad regime to go from Syria. But we all understand the threat that is being caused by ISIS, and it's that threat building upon the civil war that was already existing in Turkey that has created the enormous refugee crisis. So a no-fly zone over Syria, I'm not sure, it would have to be coordinated between the United States and Russia and France and anybody else who's going to be using military flights in Syria. And when it comes to the Syria, I don't know what the capacity now is of the Syrian government, but obviously Russia is going to support them having the ability to use their aircraft, and they're going to use it in ways that we don't like them using it. So all of this requires some very serious discussion and coordination, even amongst people who don't like each other.
So let's get to the Syrian refugee debate on whether or not they should be admitted into the United States. What is your position and why?
Well, I believe that we need to hit the pause button. The Syrians continue to come into the United States, not in the numbers that the president has announced. And by the way, it's important for people to understand, this is the only immigration program that the United States has where the president gets to set the cap and not the Congress. Every other immigration program that has a cap, the Congress sets it by law. But this cap, by law, the Congress granted to the president many years ago. And I think, especially given the circumstances we find ourselves in now, the Congress should pass legislation to take that authority back and set the caps each year ourselves. However, the president has announced that he intends to bring in Syrians. We've been bringing in Syrians. Last year, about 1,700. This year, meaning beginning October 1, close to 200 have been brought in. The president says that they can properly vet these people to assure that they are not national security risks. But the FBI director's testimony before the House Judiciary Committee and in response to my question was very disconcerting, because he acknowledged that the situation in Syria makes this situation different than virtually any other country in terms of the fact that we don't have the ability to tap into the right databases. Mm-hmm. We have some that are independent of Syria, and you can find some information from them, but you cannot provide all the information that is needed to properly vet. And the FBI director said in response to a question at another committee's hearing that you can ping these databases until the cows come home. Those were his words. Mm-hmm. But if there's nothing in the database that you need, you're not going to get sufficient information to make a decision. That's a paraphrase. In our committee, he said something very similar. And while the president disputes that, the Congress has simply taken that at face value and that of other national security experts and said, look, you should not bring Syrians into the United States until the FBI director certifies that there is a process that works. And then once that occurs, then each Syrian who comes in should have to be certified by the Secretary of Homeland Security, by the Director of National Intelligence and the FBI Director, that they're not a national security risk. That is not an unreasonable approach to this, given the circumstances. And quite frankly, until the President agrees to that process, he's threatening to veto it, and Harry Reid is threatening to filibuster it, until they agree to that process, the House should insist that we're not going to fund Syrian refugees coming into the United States.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you able to defund that that aspect that you mentioned? Simply defund, get rid of the money to have the Syrian refugees come into the United States without the bigger argument of, now here we go again, shutting the government down. They always manage to change that argument. Can you take those independently of each other?
Well, there are several things that factor in that discussion, and it's a great question because you're right. We get into the same situation we've had, but we could pull out the Homeland Security bill and pass it separately without this funding in it, or we could just take the funding out of the full omnibus. I'm sure the votes are there to do that in the House of Representatives, given the fact that the measure we passed last week passed with a very large bipartisan majority, a veto-proof majority. However, we don't know what's going to happen in the Senate, and what happens with the bills that House passed this week will be a good test of that, because now, rather than even allowing this serious debate about Syria to come to the floor of the Senate and be debated, Harry Reid is saying we're going to filibuster, we're going to block it from even being considered. That is outrageous. That again points to the need for changing the Senate rules, because they can't get anything done over there without a supermajority.
Right.
And that, in a situation like this, is a very poor way to operate. They should pass what they think they should pass,
right.
And if it's not the same as the House, sit down and work out the differences with the House, and then send a unified bill to the President. And then it's the President's decision to sign it or veto it, but in that case, it would be completely on his hands. The fact that they won't even get to that point is a very disturbing part of this process, not just for this, but for many, many other issues. But certainly when you have an issue involving national security, they should put aside this, my way or the highway approach, especially when they don't even have a way that I've seen clearly articulated that is an alternative to the clear decision that the House has taken and the bill the House has passed.
Well, I think everybody says it should certainly be open for debate in the Senate. So the big question is, Republicans control the Senate. They've got 55 of them in there. Why won't Majority Leader McConnell simply get rid of the man-made, this is a man-made 60-vote cloture rule? Just get rid of it.
Yeah,
what stops them?
Those of us in the House, we completely agree with that. Because it weakens the entire United States Congress, including the House. And in the last Congress, we passed 400 bills through the House of Representatives, and then we pointed out that they were all stacked up on Harry Reid's desk because of this rule. Now, we have Republicans in control of the Senate, as you correctly point out. The bills are piling up on Mitch McConnell's desk. We have not yet 400, but by the time this Congress is concluded, by the end of next year, there'll probably be 400 bills on his desk. And so that points out that this is not a partisan problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's lots of partisan rancor and debate in the Senate, no question about it. But the real problem here is the Senate rules themselves. The Democrats changed those rules to suit their purposes in the last Congress in order to get the president his judicial appointments and his cabinet level and other high-level executive branch appointments. I think the Senate needs to take a step back and, under the Republicans, look at what this is doing to the ability of this great deliberative body, the United States Senate, and the entire Congress, and its ability to have checks and balances against the President of the United States. There's a lot at stake here, not just the internal operations of the Senate, and those rules need to be changed. I wouldn't propose to be too prescriptive about how they change them. They could keep some of the protections that they have for debate and for the ability of the minority to clearly have the ability to have lengthy debates on things, but the ability to even bring things to the floor of the Senate for a a vote, and even having a debate. If you have it for final passage, but you still at least get to have the debate. You have amendments and so on, and then you look at what the picture is, and then decide whether you can get 60 votes for that. That would be a good first step to changing what they do.
Well, I think
you could eliminate the change they made back in the 1970s that allows individual senators to secretly put holds on bills, and then the bill can't move until there are 60 people who vote for it. Those individual senators should be required, just like in the old Jimmy Stewart movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, they should be required to go to the floor of the Senate and do their filibuster out in the open so people can see who they are and what they stand for.
No, look, I mean, and that's why...
There are lots of ways to change it, but they need to change it however they do.
They need to do something, and that's why so many Republicans are frustrated right now. That's why you look at these outsiders with almost 60% in the public opinion surveys, because it's like, well, we gave the Senate a conservative majority. We put 9 senators in there, and there is no change. It's the same as if Reid was still there. I think that's what's driving people bananas. Mr. Chairman, we've only got 2 minutes. I want you to share with our audience a couple of significant criminal justice pieces of legislation that you just got out of the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, well, this is very encouraging, and it is running counter to a lot of other things going on in Washington, because these are bipartisan bills. But one of them deals with this fact. There are now nearly 5,000 separate, distinct federal criminal laws on the books, and we're adding them at a rate of about 500 a decade. When I became chairman of the committee, I said this has got to change. So I appointed a task force called the Overcriminalization Task Force, and we examined these laws, how many times they duplicate or even conflict with state criminal laws. They cover things that are not necessary to cover. There's a federal criminal law that says it's a crime to transport dentures across state lines. So we're getting rid of that. But what we're more importantly doing, since we are not going to be able to go through and get rid of all these laws, we're going to require that they show criminal intent. The overwhelming majority of them now, you can commit a crime and not have any clue and not any intent to have committed a crime, and find out that the federal bureaucracy is now not only attempting to impose a fine on you for violating some regulation, but also being charged with a felony, which gives the government huge leverage in dealing with an individual or a business, saying, well, if you don't pay our fine and the amount we want you to pay, we're going to also charge you with a felony when you didn't even know you were committing a crime. So we're going to require that. We're going to require that the government prove that you had criminal intent. Secondly, our sentencing laws have not been carefully examined in many years, and so we have a bill that reforms the sentencing laws. In some instances, reducing certain mandatory minimum sentences. In some cases, making sure that new crimes receive appropriate sentences, in fact, increased sentences. And in all cases, making sure that, unlike this recent prison release that occurred at the beginning of this month of 6,000 people, that no one who has committed a violent crime be released from prison early because of changes in the law. If you have committed a violent crime, and the bill broadly defines what a violent crime is, you don't get released unless you can show that your crime was not a violent crime.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that's where we are out of time. That makes a lot of sense. Finally, we get something out with bipartisan backing. I want to thank Chairman Bob Goodlatte, House Judiciary Committee, for his time with us today. Mr. Chairman, have a fabulous holiday. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, John.